I don't think there are any two people in the world that are better at this kind of transaction than Ajit and Warren, and nobody else has had the experience we've had. Just get me in a lot more of those businesses, and I'll accept a little extra worry.
There's one thing I should mention too, that we actually were the only insurance operation in the world who would write that sort of a contract, and that where it would be satisfactory to the other party. I mean, when somebody hands you $10.2 billion and says, I'm counting on you to pay $20 billion back, even if it's 50 years from now on the last dollar, there are very few people that they want to hand $10.2 billion to. So there's limited people on the other side. I mean, there's not that many people remotely that have that kind of size deal.
Very few is a good expression. He means one.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go to station 2.
Hello, Mr. Buffett, Mr. Munger. My name is Grant Gibson. I'm from Denver, Colorado, and this is my 5th consecutive year here, so thank you for having us.
Thanks for coming.
Appreciate it. With all due respect, Mr. Buffett, this question is for Mr. Munger. In your career of thousands of negotiations and business dealings, could you describe for the crowd which one sticks out in your mind as your favorite or as otherwise noteworthy?
Well, I don't think I've got a favorite, but the one that probably did us the most good as a learning experience was See's Candy. It just, the power of the brand, the unending flow of ever-increasing money with no work.
Sounds nice.
It was, and I'm not sure we would have bought the Coca-Cola if we hadn't bought the C's. I think that a life properly lived is just learn all the time. And I think Berkshire's gained enormously from these investment decisions by learning through a long, long period. Every time you appoint a new person that's never had big capital allocation experience, it's like rolling the dice. And I think we're way better off having done it so long. But the decisions blend. And the one feature that comes through is the continuous learning. If we had not kept learning, you wouldn't even be here. You'd be alive probably, but not here.
There's nothing like the pain of being in a lousy business to make you appreciate a good one.
Well, there's nothing like getting into a really good one. That's a very pleasant experience, and it's a learning experience. I have a friend who says, the first rule of fishing is to fish where the fish are. And the second rule of fishing is to never forget the first rule. And we've gotten good at fishing where the fish are.
Yeah, that's only metaphorically. I went to fish with Charlie one time.
There are too many other boats in the damn water, but the fish are still there.
Yeah, we bought a department store in Baltimore in 1966, and there's really nothing like being in the experience of trying to decide whether you're going to put a new store in an area that hasn't really developed yet enough to support it, but your competitor may move there first, and then you have the decision of whether to jump in, and if you jump in, that kind of spoils it. Now you got 2 stores where even 1 store isn't quite justified. How to play those games, those business games, is you learn a lot by trying, and what you really learn is which ones to avoid. I mean, if you just stay out of a bunch of terrible businesses, you're off to a very great start, because we've tried them all.
But you can really learn because the experience is a lot like eating cockleburgers, and it really gets your attention.
Well, we won't expand on that. Andrew Ross Sorkin.
Good morning, Warren. This question comes from a longtime shareholder who, I should tell you, accosted me last night in the lobby of the Hilton Hotel with this question. Warren, for years you stayed away from technology companies, saying they were too hard to predict and didn't have moats. Then you seemed to change your view about technology when you invested in IBM. and again when you recently invested in Apple. But then on Friday, you said IBM had not met your expectations and sold a third of our stake. Do you view IBM and Apple differently? And what have you learned about investing in technology companies?
Well, I do view them differently, but obviously, when I bought the IBM, started buying it 6 years ago, I thought it would do better in the 6 years that have elapsed than it has. And Apple, I regard them as being a quite different business. I think Apple was much more of a consumer products business in terms of in terms of sort of analyzing moats around it and consumer behavior and all that sort of thing. It's obviously a product with all kinds of tech built into it. But in terms of laying out what their prospective customers will do in the future as opposed to, say, on IBM's customers, it's a different sort of analysis. That doesn't mean it's correct. And we'll find out over time. But they are two different types of decisions. And I was wrong on the first one, and we'll find out whether I'm right or wrong on the second. But I do not regard them as apples and apples, and I don't quite regard them as apples and oranges. But it's somewhat in between on that. Charlie?
Well, we avoided the tech stocks because we felt we had no advantage there, and other people did. And I think that's a good idea, not to play where the other people are better. But if you ask me in retrospect, what was our worst mistake in the tech field? I think we were smart enough to figure out Google. Those ads worked so much better in the early days than anything else. So I would say that we failed you there. And we were smart enough to do it and didn't do it. We do that all the time, too.
Yeah, we were their customer very early on with Geico, for example, and we saw. I don't. These figures are way out of date, but as I remember, we were paying them $10 or $11 a click or something like that. And anytime you're paying somebody $10 or $11 every time somebody just punches a little thing where you've got no cost at all, that's a good business unless somebody's going to take it away from you. And so we were close up seeing the impact of that. And incidentally, if any of you don't have anything to do in your hotel rooms tonight, just keep punching Progressive or something, and you're gonna. Don't really do that. The thought just happened to cross my mind. But that is, you've never seen a business, almost never seen a business like it, where and I think for LASIK surgery and things like that, I think the figures were, $60 or $70 a click with no incremental, no cost. So, and I knew the guys. I mean, they actually designed their prospectus. They came to see me, and a little bit after the original one, when they went public, a little bit after Berkshire even. And so I had plenty of ways to ask questions or anything of the sort, educate myself, but I blew it.
We blew Walmart, too. When it was a total cinch, we were smart enough to figure that out, and we didn't. Yeah, figuring out execution is what counts. So,
anyway, well, and I could be making two mistakes on IBM. I mean, it's harder to predict, in my view, the winners in various items, or how much price competition will enter in to something like cloud services and all that. I made a statement the other day, which it's really remarkable, and I asked Charlie whether he could think of a situation like it, where one person has built an extraordinary economic machine in two really pretty different industries, almost simultaneously, as has happened.
From a standing start at zero.
From a standing start at zero with competitors with lots of capital and everything else, to do it in retailing and to do it with the cloud, like Jeff Bezos has done. I mean, I mean, people like the Mellons invested in a lot of different industries and all of that, but he has been in effect the CEO simultaneously of two businesses starting from scratch, that if, Andy Grove at Intel used to say, think about if you had a silver bullet and you could shoot it and get rid of one of your competitors, who would it be? Well, I think that both in the cloud and in retail, there are a lot of people that would aim that silver bullet at Jeff. And he's done it's a different sort of game. But he's, at the Washington Post, he's played that hand as well as anybody, I think, possibly could. So it's a remarkable business achievement where he's been involved actually in the execution, not just bankrolling it, of two businesses that are probably as feared by their competitors almost as any you can find. Charlie, you got further thoughts?
Well, we're sort of like the Mellons, old-fashioned people who've done all right. And Jeff Bezos is a different species.
And we missed it entirely, incidentally. We never owned a share of Amazon. Okay, Greg Warren.
Warren, my question relates to some recent stock purchases as well. Unlike the railroads, which benefit from colossal barriers to entry due to their established, practically impossible to replicate networks of rail and rights of way, the airline industry seems to have few, if any, advantages. Even with the consolidation we've seen during the past 15 years, the barriers to entry are few and the exit barriers are high. The industry also suffers from low switching costs and intense pricing competition and is heavily exposed to fuel costs, with rising fuel prices being difficult to pass on and declining fuel prices leading to more price competition. Compare this with rail customers who have few choices and thus wield limited buying power, and where fuel charges allow the industry to mitigate fuel price fluctuations. While you've noted several times since the airline stock purchases were announced that the two industries are quite different and that comparisons should not be made to Berkshire's move into railroads a decade ago, could you walk us through what convinced you that the airlines were different enough this time around for Berkshire to invest close to $10 billion in the four major airlines? Because it would seem to me that UPS, which you have a small stake in, and FedEx, both of which have wider economic moats built on more identifiable and durable competitive advantages, would be a better option for long-term investors.
Yeah, the decision in respect to airlines had no connection with our being involved in the railroad business. I mean, you can classify them in, maybe in as transportation business or something, but it had no connection, and no more connection than the fact we own Geico or any other business. You couldn't pick a tougher industry, ever since Orville went up, and I said, that if anybody had really been thinking about investors, they should have had Wilbur shoot him down and saved everybody a lot of money for 100 years. You can go to the internet and type in airlines and bankrupt, and you'll see that something like 100 airlines in that general range, gone bankrupt in the last few decades. And actually, Charlie and I were directors for some time of U.S. Air, and people write about how we had a terrible experience in U.S. Air. It was one of the dumbest things I've ever done. And there's a lot of
made a fair amount of money out of it, too.
Yeah, and we made a lot of money out of it.
It was undeserved.
But we made a lot of money out of it because there was one little brief period when people got all enthused about U.S. Air. And after we left as directors and after we sold our position, U.S. Air managed to go bankrupt twice in the subsequent period. I mean, you've named all of the, not all of them, but you've named a number of factors that just make for terrible economics. And I will tell you that if capacity, it's a fiercely competitive industry. The question is whether it's a suicidally competitive industry, which it used to be. I mean, when you get virtually every one of the major carriers and dozens and dozens and dozens of minor carriers going bankrupt, it ought to come upon you finally that maybe you're in the wrong industry. It has been operating for some time now at 80% or better of capacity being available seat miles. And you can see what deliveries are going to be and that sort of thing. So if you make I think it's fair to say that they will operate at higher degrees of capacity over the next 5 or 10 years than the historical rates, which caused all of them to go broke. Now, the question is whether, even when they're doing it in the 80s, they will do suicidal things in terms of pricing. Remains to be seen. They actually, at present, are earning quite high returns on invested capital. I think higher than either FedEx or UPS if you actually check that out. But that doesn't mean tomorrow morning, if you're running one of those airlines and the other guy cuts his prices, you cut your prices. And as you say, there's more flexibility when fuel goes down to bring down prices than there is to raise prices when prices go up. So the industry, it is no cinch that the industry will have some more pricing sensibility in the next 10 years than they had in the last 100 years. But the conditions have improved for that. They've got more labor stability than they had before because they're basically all going to, they've been through bankruptcy and they're all going to sort of have an industry pattern bargaining, it looks to me like. They're going to have a shortage of pilots to some degree. But it's not like buying See's candy. Charlie?
No, but the investment world has gotten tougher with more competition, more affluence, and more absolute obsession with finance throughout the whole country. And we picked up a lot of low-hanging fruit in the old days where it was very, very easy and we had huge margins of safety. Now we operate with a less advantageous general climate, and maybe we have small statistical advantages where in the old days it was like shooting fish in a barrel. But that's all right. It's okay if it gets a little harder after you get filthy rich.
Yeah. Charlie's more philosophical than I am on that point. So,
well, I can't bring back the low-hanging fruit, Warren. You're just going to have to keep reaching for the higher branches.
Greg, I think the odds are very high that there are more revenue passenger miles 5 years from now or 10 years from now. If the airlines, if the airline companies are only worth 5 or 10 years from now what they're worth now in terms of equity, we'll get a pretty reasonable rate of return because they're going to buy in a lot of stock at fairly low multiples. So if the company's worth the same amount at the end of the year and there's fewer shares of stock outstanding, over time we make decent money, and all 4 of the major airlines are buying in stock at a...
You got to remember that the railroads were a terrible business for decades and decades and decades, and then they got good.
Yeah, I like the position. Obviously, by buying all 4, it means that it's very hard to distinguish who will do at least in my mind, it's hard to distinguish who will do the best. I think the odds are quite high that if you take revenue passenger miles flowing 5 or 10 years from now, it will be a higher number, and there'll be low-cost people to come in, and the Spirits of the world and JetBlues, whatever it may be. But my guess is that all 4 of the companies we have will have higher revenues. The question is what their operating ratio is. They will have fewer shares outstanding by a significant margin. So even if they're worth just what they're worth today, we could make a fair amount of money, but it is no cinch by a long shot. Okay, station 3.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sibylle Arians. I'm from Germany, and I'm member of board of Ethicon Foundation, Ethics and Economy. I'm very happy that I could put my question here, and maybe you are not as happy as I am to listen to it.
Well, we'll try to stay happy. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Mr. Buffett, a few years ago, I saw a movie in which you proclaimed that the print of the dollar bill, "In God We Trust," does not really oppress your philosophy. In your opinion, only cash counts, and your credo is, in the dollar I trust.
I don't think I've ever said that, actually. But
well, I can show you the movie. That would prove.
Oh, well, send me a clip.
Maybe it was just joking, but always behind a joke there is also a truth. So, well, you laughed heartily at that moment. You, as one of the most richest men of all times on this earth, a good-humored, friendly, elderly gentleman. Whatever motivated those who designed the dollar notes, they certainly wanted to say that there is something higher than the value of this printed paper. Regrettably, you have shown many times in your life that you see this differently. You have accumulated billions of dollars, showed extraordinary cleverness and skill, and you know better to pick up than many others who, like you, use the rules which are inherent to capitalism for their own intentions. But have you ever given a thought to what troubles and sacrifices, slavery and destruction of Mother Earth, and even diseases and deaths stick to the dollar bills which you gather so eagerly? Let's take Coca-Cola. Ethicon Foundation Ethics and Economy from Germany has awarded the Black Planet Award to the members of the board of directors, as well as to the large shareholders, Warren Buffett and Herbert Allen, because you are co-responsible for all of what makes this group make so much money, isn't it? Among other things, Coca-Cola deprives people of their drinking water in drought-prone areas of the world.
Are you asking a question?
Contaminate the groundwater in these areas.
I don't want to interrupt you, but are you making a speech or asking a question?
I put my question right now.
Okay, good.
Will you give up your Coca-Cola shares if the destruction of the environment, the monopolization of the right to healthy drinking water, and the shameless exploitation of the workers continue?
Well, that's more of a speech than a question.
Yeah. I don't think that quote you had earlier. I've said once or twice that it should say "in the Federal Reserve we trust," because they print the money, and if they print too much of it, it could decline in value. But I have never, to my knowledge, I've never said anything like you originally said. And I would say this: I think I've been eating things I like to eat all my life, and Coca-Cola. This Coca-Cola is 12 ounces. I drink about 5 a day. It has about 1.2. It has about 1.2 ounces of sugar in it. And if you look at what different people get their sugar and calories from, they get them from all kinds of things. I happen to believe that I like to get 1.2 ounces with this, and it's enjoyable. Since 1886, people have found it pleasant, and I would say that if you pick every meal in terms of what somebody in some recent publication has told you is the very best for you, I offer you that. I say go to it. But if you told me that I would live 1 year longer, and I don't even think of that, I would live 1 year longer if I'd eat nothing but broccoli and asparagus and everything my Aunt Alice wanted me to eat all my life, or I would eat everything I enjoyed eating, including chocolate sundaes and Coca-Cola and steak and hash browns. I would rather eat in a way I enjoy for my whole life than eat some other way and live another year. And I do think that choice should be mine. If somebody decides sugar is harmful, maybe you'd encourage the government to ban sugar, but sugar in Coca-Cola is not different than eating sugar, put on my grape nuts in the morning or whatever else I'm having. So I think Coca-Cola has been a very, very positive factor in America and the world for a long, long time. And you can look at a list of achievements of the company. And I really don't want anybody telling me I can't drink it. Charlie?
Well, I've solved my Coca-Cola problem by drinking Diet Coke, and I swill the stuff like other people swill I don't know what. And I've been doing it for just as long as you've been taking all those Coca-Colas I've had breakfast with Warren when he has Coca-Colas and nuts. And
pretty damn good, too.
If you keep doing that, Warren, you may not make 100.
Well, I think there's something in longevity to be feeling happy about your life, too. So
Absolutely.
Okay, Carol?
This question is from Franz Tromberger of Austria, and it concerns intrinsic value, which is neither, Warren he may amend my definition here, but which is neither a company's accounting value nor its stock market value, but is rather its estimated real value. So the question is, at what rate has Berkshire compounded intrinsic value over the last 10 years, and at what rate, including your explanation for it, please, do you think intrinsic value can be compounded over the next 10 years?
Yeah. Intrinsic value, can only be calculated or gains, in retrospect, but the intrinsic value, pure definition, would be the cash to be generated between now and Judgment Day, discounted at an interest rate that seems appropriate at the time, and that's varied enormously over a 30 or 40-year period. If you pick out 10 years, and you're back to May of 2007, we had some unpleasant things coming up, but I would say that we've probably compounded at about 10%, and I think that's going to be tough to achieve, in fact, almost impossible to achieve if we continued in this interest rate environment. That's the number one question. If you ask me to give the answer to the question, if I could only pick one statistic to ask you about the future before I gave the answer, I would not ask you about GDP growth. I would not ask you about who was going to be president. A million things. I would ask you what the interest rate is going to be over the next 20 years on average, the 10-year or whatever you wanted to do. And if you assume our present interest rate structure is likely to be the average over 10 or 20 years, then I would say it'd be very difficult to get to 10%. On the other hand, if I were to pick with a whole range of probabilities on interest rates, I would say that rate might be it might be somewhat aspirational, and it might be doable. And you would say, well, we can't continue these interest rates for a long time. I would ask you to look at Japan, where 25 years ago we couldn't see how their interest rates could be sustained, and we're still looking at the same thing. So I do not think it's easy to predict the course of interest rates at all. And unfortunately, predicting that is embedded in giving a good answer to you. I would say the chances of getting a terrible result in Berkshire are probably as low as about anything you can find. Chances of getting a sensational result are also about as low as anything you can find. So if my best guess would be in the 10% range, but that assumes somewhat higher interest rates, not dramatically higher, but somewhat higher interest rates in the next 10 or 20 years than we've experienced in the last 7 years. Charlie?
Well, there's no question about the fact that the future with our present size is in terms of percentage rates of return is going to be less glorious than our past. And we keep saying that, and now we're proving it.
Do you want to end on that note, Charlie, or would you care to?
Well, I do think Warren's right about one thing. I think we have a collection of businesses that, on average, has better investment values than, say, the S&P average. So I don't think you shareholders have a terrible problem.
And I would say we probably, well, I'm certain we do have more of a shareholder orientation than the S&P 500 as a whole. I mean, this company has a culture where decisions are made as an owner, as a private owner, would make them. And frankly, that's a luxury we have that many companies don't have. I mean, they are under pressures today sometimes to do things. One of the questions I asked the CEO of every public company that I meet is, what would you be doing differently if you owned it all yourself? And the answer, is usually this, that, and a couple of other things. If you would ask us, the answer is we're doing exactly what we would do if we owned them all the stock ourselves. And I think that's a small plus over time. Anything further, Charlie?
I think we have one other advantage. A lot of other people are trying to be brilliant, and we're just trying to stay rational. And it's a big advantage. Trying to be brilliant is dangerous, particularly when you're gambling.
Okay, Jonathan.
If corporate tax rates are reduced meaningfully, Berkshire will enjoy a one-time boost to book value because of its sizable deferred tax liability, and its go-forward earnings should be higher too, at least in theory. How much of the reduced tax rate will be passed along to Berkshire's customers through, for instance, lower electricity rates or lower railroad shipping rates, and how much will go to Berkshire shareholders?
Yeah, the question is, in the case of our utility businesses, all benefit of lower tax rates goes to customers, and it should be, because we are allowed a return on equity in general. I mean, I'm simplifying a little bit, but we're allowed a return on equity that's computed on an after-tax basis, and the utility commissions would, if taxes were raised, would presumably give us higher rates to compensate for that, and if taxes are lowered, they would say you're not entitled to make more money just because tax rates on equity, because tax rates have been lowered. So forget about the utility portion of the deferred taxes. The deferred taxes that are applicable to our unrealized gains in securities, we would get all the benefit of, because I mentioned we had $90 billion plus of unrealized gains, and if the rates were changed on those in either direction, our owners, dollar for dollar, will participate in that. And then you get into the other businesses. You mentioned the railroad, but it can be all of our other businesses. To some extent, if tax rates are lowered to different degrees in different industries, depending on the number of players, the competitive conditions, some of it almost certainly gets competed away, and some of it would likely not be competed away. And economists can argue about that a lot, but I've seen it in action in a lot of cases. You've had a big decline in rates, for example, in the UK, and we've had them over my lifetime. We had 52% corporate rates. We've had a lot of different numbers. So I have seen how economic behavior works, and I would say that it's certain that some of any lower rate would be competed away, and it's virtually certain that some would inure to the benefit of the shareholders, and it's very industry and company specific in how that plays out. Charlie? Well, with dollar for dollar, I mean, there's 90 or 95 billion. If the rate were to drop 10%, that $9.5 billion is by 10 percentage points. That $9.5 billion is real. On the other hand, if it goes up, as it did, went up from 28 to 35%, they can take it away from us too.
Well, I think it's true that we're peculiar in one way. If things go to hell in a handbasket and then get better later, we're likely to do better than most others. And we don't wish for that, and we don't want our country to have to suffer through it. And we fear what might happen if the country went through the ringer like that. But if that real adversity comes, we're likely to do better in the end. We're good at navigating through that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and occasionally there will be
a lot. In fact, we're quite good at it.
There'll be occasional hiccups in the American economy. It doesn't have much to do with who's president or anything like that. Those people may get blamed or given credit for different things, but it's just it is the nature of market systems to occasionally go haywire in one direction or other, and it's been ever thus. It'll be ever thus. It does not have a. There's not a. It's not on a regular sine wave type picture or anything of the sort, but it's certain to happen from time to time, and we will probably have a fair amount of money and credit at that time, and we're not affected. When the rest of the world is fearful, we know America's going to come out fine, and we will not have any trouble psychologically acting at all. And then the question is, how much do we have in the way of resources? We'll also never put the company in any kind of risk just because we see a lot of opportunities. We'll grab all the ones we can that we can handle and not lose a day of sleep. I didn't quite get that, but in any event, we will now go to station 4, and if the person yelling on. Are we up there in station? Are you in station 4?
Dr. Bruce Hertz from Glenview, Illinois. I wanted to thank you for allowing me to attend. I feel both honored and blessed. My question for Mr. Buffett is, you've always advised us to purchase equities that appreciate in value. Yet, a few years ago, you sold your used Cadillac at a tremendous profit. How can you justify selling a depreciating asset for a significant profit? Thank you.
Yeah, well, actually, I gave it to Girls Inc., and they sold it, and that was kind of an interesting. A very nice guy bought it for $100 and some thousand, and I did not. And Girls Inc. got the money, and he came later actually with his family, and he drove it away without any plates. He was driving back to New York, and he got picked up by the police in Illinois, and he said, well, he started giving this explanation about how he'd given this money to Girls Inc. and was driving the car back, and he had this nice-looking family with him, and the cops were quite skeptical. But fortunately, I had signed the dashboard for him as part of the deal. And so they looked at that, and then they just said, well, did he give you any stock tips? And they let him go. And I can't recall ever selling a used car at a profit, but I don't think I've sold any personal possession. Well, I've got a house for sale.
You don't have any personal possession.
Yeah. No, anything you see with a figure attached like that.
You're a fatter version of Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi.
The guy was a very nice guy that bought it, and that's check cleared, so we're fine. Becky?
I'd like to ask a question that can serve as a follow-up to the question that Carol had asked, and Charlie in that response said that he thinks the Berkshire's businesses on the whole will do better than the S&P 500. Clark Cameron from Birmingham, Alabama, who owns 281 shares of Berkshire B, writes in and asks, why have you advised your wife to invest in index funds after your death rather than Berkshire Hathaway? I believe Munger has counseled his offspring to, quote, not be so dumb as to sell.
Yeah. She won't be selling any Berkshire to buy the index funds. All of my Berkshire, every single share, will go to philanthropy. So I don't even regard myself as owning Berkshire. Basically, it's committed. And so far about 40% has already been distributed. So the question is, somebody who is not an investment professional will be, I hope, reasonably elderly by the time that the estate gets settled. And what is the best investment, meaning one that there would be less worry of any kind connected with, and less people coming around and saying, why don't you sell this and do something else and all those things. She's going to have more money than she needs. And the big thing then you want is money not to be a problem. And there will be no way that if she holds the S&P, or virtually no way, absent something happened with weapons of mass destruction, but virtually no way that she'll have all the money that she possibly can use. She'll have a little liquid money so that if stocks are down tremendously at some point, they close the stock exchange for a while, anything like that, she'll still feel that she's got plenty of money. And the object is not to maximize. It doesn't make any difference whether the amount she gets doubles or triples or anything of the sort. The important thing is that she never worries about money the rest of her life. And I had an Aunt Katie here in Omaha, who Charlie knew well, and worked for her husband, as did I. And she worked very hard all her life and had lived in a house she paid, $8,000 for at 45th and Hickory all her life. And because she was in Berkshire, she lived in 97. She ended up with, a few $100 million. And she would write me a letter every 4 or 5 months, and she said, "Dear Warren, I hate to bother you, but am I going to run out of money?" And I would write her back, and I'd say, "Dear Katie, it's a good question, because if you live 986 years, you're going to run out of money." And then about 4 or 5 months later, she'd write me the same letter again. And I have seen there's no way in the world, if you've got plenty of money, that it should become a minus in your life. And there will be people, if you've got a lot of money, that come around with various suggestions for you, sometimes well-meaning, sometimes not so well-meaning. So if you've got something that's certain to deliver, it was all in Berkshire, they'd say, well, if Warren was alive today, he would be telling you to do this. I just don't want anybody to go through that. And the S&P will be I think actually what I'm suggesting is what a very high percentage of people should do something like that. And I don't think they will have I think there's a chance they won't have as much peace of mind if they own one stock and they've got neighbors and friends and relatives that are trying to do some, like I say, sometimes well-intentioned, sometimes otherwise, to do something else. And so I think it's a policy that will get a good result and is likely to stick. Charlie?
Well, as Becky said, the Mungers are different. I want them to hold the Berkshire.
Well, I want to hold the Berkshire too.
No, I don't like the. I recognize the logic of the fact that S&P algorithm is very hard to beat. Diversified portfolio of big companies, it's all but impossible for most people. But I'm just more comfortable with the Berkshire.
Well, it's the family business.
Yeah.
But I've seen too many people as they get older, particularly being susceptible, and just having to listen to the arguments of people coming
well,
along.
if you're going to protect your heirs from the stupidity of others, you may have some good system, but I'm not much interested in that subject.
Okay. Okay, Jay.
Berkshire reportedly partnered with 3G in Kraft Heinz's attempt to acquire Unilever for $143 billion. How much was Berkshire willing to invest in this deal? And does this mean Berkshire's next large acquisition is likely to be in partnership with 3G?
Yeah, well, Kraft, you'd have to distinguish between two situations. Kraft Heinz was a widely owned company in which we and 3G act as a control group and have a little over 50% of the stock. But as originally contemplated, no certainty that